Alright, now on this video, I'll be showing you exactly how to use JavaScript to manipulate your page. Now, if you look at this Gmail page, you can see that when you hover on the screen, you can see that it's scaled up. It's scaled up a little, so you can see it's scaled up. So we're going to be achieving this. We're also going to be achieving when you add item here, it showcases here. Also, when you reduce it, here, the quantity also shows here. So when you increase here, it becomes 2 and it also shows here. I'll also be dealing with the product quantity. When the product is being added, the quantity will be reducing. When the product is being subtracted from, the quantity will be increasing. And when the quantity available finishes, the product becomes unavailable. So you won't be able to add onto it, but you can subtract from it. So these are the functionalities we're going to be doing using JavaScript. Right, so this is the one we're already building. So we've already added this functionality here, this tab. I also have this one rendered and we're done with this one. So let's implement this functionality. The first thing we're going to do is we want to scale. When we hover in and hover out, we want to scale it back. All right, to do that, we already have a function here called scale productive date div. This is where I'll be writing all the functions. All right, so if we go up here, we'll see this particular variable content display divs. This is actually accessing document by get element by ID using content display ID. Then we're using the child node. The child node is a method available in HTML element. If you go to the HTML, you can see this. This is the ID. So this div here, it is actually what is displaying all of this content. All of this content were injected in it using JavaScript. And this is the mother div. Now, when we apply child nodes, what it does is that it gives us access to every HTML element under the element you're calling. We are calling this element, is the element we are calling here. So this element is this div. So when we say child node, we are saying everything that appears inside this element is a child node. Everything. It could be div, could be page tag, could be image tag, could be any tag that appears under this div is a child node. All right. So if you copy this and if you do console.log content divs, exactly. Now what you will find when you go here, node lists, all of these items, look at them. You can see how they are being highlighted here. So this is the first one, this second one, this third one, this fourth one, fifth one, sixth one, that's seventh, it is the last one. So every content inside here, every content that run inside here is a child node, and this all the content that run inside here are all of this content. Then remember how it was. We have divs here. There's a div housing the image, the product name, the product price, the quantity, and this one is also a div. This div is also housing there's a div inside the major div that is housing the button, the display quantity, and the additional and the addition button. Right, so this is all we have that make up the entirety of this whole div. Okay, so since we have access to this div, we can actually iterate it. Remember, it's an array. When you use child node, it's going to return an array. See, it's an array, 10 lists. All right, see, length of 10. Right, so we can actually iterate it since it's an array. So we can do content display divs using an array method you like using for each. So item index. So now what that means is that we now have access to each of these items. Let's check out what item is. This is the index position. So what that means is that we now have access to each of these items. We can now access them because it was an array before we could access them individually. Now we can access them individually. So if we go here and check and see each of these divs, look at these divs. Now we have access to each of these divs. They are still node. Like these are all divs. All right, these are all divs. So when you open this first one, you can see this image. You can see this product name. You can see the product price. You can see the product quantity. Then you can see that this one is also a div. Look at it. It's a div. Div. It's a div. this div, you can see this is the class custom selection btn div. Custom selection btn div. When you check out the function that created these items, you can see custom selection, this one, this is the div here. So you can see it's a div. So remember when we created this div here, if we go up, you can see when we created this div here. All right, so this div here is the last item on the array. This all of this has all of these is the last item on the array. All right, this one, when we open it, we can see the button here. This is, that's it, this button. Then we can see the p tag, then we can see the addition button. All right, so to access these items on the each of the item array, this is the last item, is the last item on the array. So because array starts from index 0, to always access the last item of an array, you can always use the length minus 1. You know, normally numeric figures start from 1. However, array starts from index 0. So when you say the total length of this, if the total length of this should be, if we start counting from 1, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. However, in array, we start counting from 0. So you say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So to get this index, you have to say the length of this array minus 1 will give you this. So now that we have access to these items, we can actually add event listener to this. Okay, so let's add event listener to this to scale it. Okay, so remember that each of these items, each of these div is item here, this item. So we can do item dot, let's add a comment, add events to animate scale. So we can say item dot add event listener. We are looking for an event type of click. Okay, no, we're looking for an event type of mouse enter. Then we have comma, then we write our function. This function is only going to say item dot style dot transform equals to scale 1.4. All right, so let's see what happens here. If we go here, you can see it's moving. So we can do 1.2. Now on the Jumia.js, we need to look at the scale. We need to apply the scale there as well. Okay, so this is a div. So here the initial state will have scale of 1, and you also pass animation to it, transition 0.25 seconds is in. All right, so here you can say it animates 1.1. Okay, let's as well return it back to the scale state. So here is going to be mouse leave. So the function, so here we can say item dot, you can see it's scaling now. It's working fine, perfectly as we want. Good. Now when we look at this again, let's look at this content divs again. If we inspect the content div again, we can see that each of these are divs, and because each of we house everything here inside the div, so we need to also use the child node to access what are inside these divs. All of these are divs having content inside them. They have an image and all of this content, so we need to use child nodes to access what's inside these divs, each of these divs, what's inside each of these divs. That's what we're going to do. So to do that, we are going to come here, const get m equals to item dot child nodes. Okay, then we are targeting the last item there. Remember that we are interested in the last item because now we want to work on these buttons. We want to add and subtract these quantities for them to for it to reflect. So to do that, we can say get nodes equals to get dot child nodes. All right, so now we have access to the content inside the divs. So if we do console.log get nodes, let's see what that gives us. You can see that now give us access to each of the items. Okay, look at them here. Each of these items are here. So remember that the node child nodes will always return an array. So we have to also use an array method to map into the get node, get nodes, get nodes, but for each button index. Now that we have this button index here, we now have access to each of these items. So if we go here and still console.log button, we'll check it. You can see we now have access to each of these items. We have this is a button, there's the first one, the p tag, the button, p tag, button, the p tag. So we'll have access to each of these. So now we can be able to control them now, have access to them. All right. However, we are faced with another challenge. What's the challenge? Challenge is how do we know when we click the addition button, the subtraction button? Remember that each of these item button here refers to each of these, each of these, each of these. That's what it means. But how do we determine when we click add, when we click subtract, and how do we ensure that we are selecting this p tag to update it when when an item is added here using the plus sign? Okay, how do we do that? Right, to do that, we can use a conditional statement. A conditional statement in programming is what you use to tell programming to run if a condition is true or false. So when you say if this is equals to this, do this, else do this, you use if. In JavaScript, you use if, or use else if, or you use if and else. So what that simply means that if this is true, do this, else do this. Like if a, if 1 is equals to 1, do this, else do this. That's what it means. So to do this, I'm going to say if button dot node name. Now there is a method in the elements JavaScript elements that you can use, a method that you can use to determine what name of tag this is. If this is a type of button or image tag or whatever it is, because we want to focus on the button. So we want to ensure that action happens when the user clicks on the button. So if we do console.log button dot node name, if we check this out, you'll see what that we can look at button p tag button. So that's it, button p tag button p tag button. That's it. So with this, I can write a conditional statement and say if this is equals to this, all right, then allow this clicking to take place. That is conditional statement. It's more like saying if 5 is a number, do this. So I'm going to be saying if button dot node name is equals to button, that's button. Now I want to ensure that I can differentiate between when the user clicks a plus or subtraction button. All right, so I can say if then button. The operands are what you use to combine if statements. All right, you can use and, or, equals to, this is or, this equals to. All right, for here I'm using and because I want these both conditions to be true. If you use or, any of them that is true should run the code. All right, however, these two has to be true for the code to run. Button dot inner text text contents. If it is equals to plus sign, then we know that it's an addition button. Then we want to run this console.log. Console.log addition button. Let's check it out. This should only happen when an addition button is clicked. So check your console.log. When I click addition button, you can see addition button is being shown. All right, and because I've not done the on-click event, all right, so to actually do that, I can actually add the on-click event and say button dot add event listener. Then I am looking for the click event in comma, then the function, then I can call the console.log. So we can see now that when I click this button, that is when this heaven, when the console will show. So I click here, heaven. So this shows that I'm selecting the plus button. If I click the minus button, you can see it's not showing anything. That's because for now I want to keep it track when the users click on the button, on the addition button. And this is actually how you solve problem in coding. You have to think of the method to use. You have to think how your logic should flow. This is the logic because you have to be able to tell when the user is adding, when the user is subtracting. And this is one of the best ways you can determine that. I'm saying that if the button.node name, which is a method in JavaScript that tells the type of a button, the type of an element that you're working with, I want to be sure that I'm working with a button. So I'm saying that, okay, when it's a button, not when it is here, not when it is here. I want to add the event click, the add event listener or the click event when the user select this button. So when the user is, when the event, when the HTML tag is a button and the text inside it, text content is simply saying what is inside the content, what's inside the element. This element has a plus sign. So if it is equals to this plus sign, so these two conditions have to be true before this can run. If it is true, then call the button, then add event listener to it, a click, and run this console.log heaven for it. This way, when I click here, you can see it's running. So how do we also determine when we click subtraction? For subtraction, we simply also say else if button dot node name, if it's equals to button, and button dot text content, it has to be to add. If it's equals to subtraction, then run this code. Okay, so we will go here. You can see that when we click on addition button, this condition, it should run heaven, and when we click on subtraction button, it should run subtracted. All right, so if you click here, you can see heaven. Subtracted is actually here until I add event listener. So I can add event listener here and say button dot add event listener, and we are looking for click events. We're looking for click events, and our function, you can see we'll be able to track when the user clicks on subtracted button. When the user click on addition button, we will track it. All right, so we're making progress. Now that we do that, so we need to now increase this. We need to increase the number of this. This is a quantity. The p tag here needs to be increased. And to do that, I want to make it cleaner. So I want to go to the top here and write another function that I will need to call. So I can say const increase quantity is equals to the function. I would want to take the argument. First argument I'm taking is I want the entirety of this element, this node element, this child node. Remember, this child node is a div inside a div. This div is inside this small div. So I want to access this div. So when I access this div, I'll be able to find the p tag and update it. So that's why I'm accepting an argument for this function. This function is what does increment. So this function will have an argument called item element as the first argument. All right. So if we come here and do console.log item element, what's it going to give us? Remember that when a function has an argument, you need to pass the argument when you're invoking the function. So here I want to invoke this function here, and I would invoke the function, then I would pass get nose to it. I'll pass this get nodes to it. So it's going to get me the exact position index of this get nodes that have not been mapped, that has not been mapped into. Then I can do another mapping here for it. So if I want to do that, I can pass the argument here. Then I want to also pass the argument here. So I invoke the function and pass the argument. Now when you go here, let's see what's going on here. Item element. What's this element? Remember when I invoke this function, I pass the argument into it. Look at the function here being invoked and argument being passed. This argument being passed, this one. All right, so if we go here and click add, you can see we now have this particular, look at it. We have this item. Can you see? Can you see? Can you see? We have access to this element here. This element, this div element. This is a div element that is housing the button, the p tag, and the addition button. Now we have access to it. We can actually iterate into it because an array, it's an array. You can see it's an array, length array 3. Okay, so you can see, look at the array sign. It's an array. So we can manipulate it using an array method. All right. So if we come here, since we have access to this, we can say item elements dot for each. Then we are going to look into item index. Okay, so if we do console.log item, now if we click this button, we now have access to each of these item individual. Look at them, beautiful. So what we are interested in doing is we want to increase this button. When we increase this number, when we add the number, you want to increase this button, want to increase this value here. All right, to do that, we also have to pass a second argument because we want to be able to pass information to this. We could actually write all of this code inside here. We write all of this code inside here. However, I want to separate the function to make it cleaner because it's going to get bigger here. All right, so to make it better, I'll need to pass the event that I'm doing. I'm doing a click event here. I'm doing a click event here. I need to pass it as an argument so that this code will know when I'm adding and when I'm subtracting. So here I can write my own argument again. The second argument that this function is collecting. Increase quantity is collecting 2 functions for now. So I'll call this event type. Okay, event type can either be add or subtract. All right, so here I'm going to write the function and say if event type is equals to add, that means the user actually click the add button. Okay, that means user click the add button. Now if it's equals to add, what am I going to do? I want to find this item, so I can say, and okay, to make it easier for us, there's only one p tag here. You can see there, this is just the only p tag, so we can simply say and if item dot node name, if it's equals to p, then if it's equals to p, what we want to, that means we now have access to this. We have access to this. If it's equals to p, if you do console.log item, so when this condition is true, pick the item that matches it. We are looking at this item. We're saying that if the event is add and the item node name is p, if it's a p tag, then console log that item that met that condition. So I want to also ensure that I pass this event on the function. So this was where I invoke the function. I pass one argument, is collecting two arguments. So I need to pass the second argument called add. I also need to pass the second argument here called subtract. So now if I click add, you can see that we have access to the p tag. Look at the p tag. We now have access to the p tag. Excellent. So now that we have access to the p tag here, remember we did a console log here. Okay, the console log here saying if the event type is add, remember I pass add here. Let me passing add here. The event is add, please fetch this item for me. The p tag. Now that I have the p tag, I can now update the p tag. So I can say item dot text content. I can now say dash show equals to, so this I'll call the number method. So I would be saying item dot text content, then I'm saying plus one. So obvious, it's very obvious that at this state, this is an addition statement. The user is adding, the user click the add button. So you can see it's increasing by one. It's increasing by one. Excellent. That's because the condition here met, the condition here is true. Because the event that is here and the second argument is add. Okay, and the item here we are looking at is the p tag. Then update that p tag. That's what it simply means. All right. So if we go back here and say, so let's deal with subtraction. Here I can say else if is another condition we are looking at now. Else if event type if is equals to subtract and item dot node name if it's equals to p tag, then we simply want to subtract this. So we can just copy this back. Okay, so let's see that if we go here, you can see we've added and we can reduce. We can add, we can reduce. Perfect. So we have solved this particular problem using the conditional statement. When this condition is true, do this. Else, when this condition is true, do this. This is how I created an event by myself by calling event here. So now I can know when I click subtract button and when I click addition button. So when I invoke the function, I pass the two arguments expecting. The first argument is actually passing is the entirety of this div containing the button, the p tag, and the addition button. And the second argument is the event, if it is subtract or add. I'm the one that added all of this. So here I can listen to those events. When it's being clicked, it's being passed along with it. Remember how argument and parameter works in JavaScript, right? So this is exactly what's going on here. All right. So now that we've done that, the next thing that we want to do is we want to update this cart. So when we add this, we also want the cart to increase. When we subtract it, we want the cart to decrease. To do that, we need to find the cart. So where is the cart on the HTML? If we go to the HTML, this is the cart text. This is what we want to work with, this cart text. So go back to our JavaScripts, and this is the cart text here. So I'm introducing you to query selector. With query selector, you can simply use your class name, cart image. You can use your class name, cart text, and just make sure you add the class. You can use the class for it. So this way, and I have access to the cart text. So this is this text here. We now have access to it on this variable using the query selector and the dot call the class name, and you generally have it. Just the way you also use this to have it. All right. However, this is for ID and this is for class. Okay, and this is not an array, it returns an single individual file. All right, so we have this card text now. So now that you have the card text, you can actually now update it. So looking at the increase function, I can call this increase function. Then the increase function, we want to increase the cards value when we add and subtract the card value when we subtract. So to do that, we simply come here and say card text dot text contents, another method, same method in JavaScript. Now I want to add it, so I can simply say card text dot text contents plus 1, add 1 to it, 1. And here we'll just do opposite of that because we are subtracting here. We simply say subtract. So let's see if that is working. So here we are. We can add it, subtract it. Now what about we'll add from here? Here one quantity. If we come here and add 1, now two items. So we have 1 here and 1 here. If we have here 2, we have 3 here, still have 1 here. We can as well go down here, add 1, it becomes 4. So 1 item of this, 1 item of this, 2 item of this, making 4 item total in the cart. Okay, so it's working perfectly. And when we subtract, you can see it's subtracting. So we're almost done with our JavaScript logics for this. Okay, so what's the next thing we want to do? We want to also work with the quantity. Currently, the quantity is not working. We've not added code for the quantity. So we want, when we increase this item, the quantity will reduce. When we reduce this item, the quantity will increase. Okay, so that's the next thing we want to do. So how do we do that? We need to find this quantity. What is handling this quantity? Where is this quantity found? Remember that this whole from the button here, the subtraction button, this p tag, and this addition button, they are inside a div, which is this div. This was where we found them, using item or child nodes to find them here. Okay, then we also did the child nodes here, so we can be able to map into, to be able to manipulate all of this. Okay, so this quantity is not found here. This quantity is found inside this place, but not on this position. This is the last position, because if you check console log item, so you can see each of these items, when you drop it down, you can see this was the one we had access to using this item.child nodes.length minus 1. This length minus 1 would give you index position of the last index in the array. Array start from index 0, so normal length starts from 1. So when you minus 1, it's meet up with the array index positioning starting from 0. So we are saying we want access to this div. That was what we had access here. And now since this is a div, it has content in it. We also did child nodes to it, having access to this as an array before we mapped into it. That's it. Now to get access to this quantity, it means this is the quantity. Look at the quantity is in index position. Since we subtracted 1 here, to get this we'll subtract 2. So if we go here, we can say cons find quantity equals to this same thing we did here. You just copy it. However, since it is on the second to the last index, instead of subtracting 1, we will subtract 2. Subtract 2. So if you check this now, you can see you now have access to the p tag. You can see you now have access to this p tag. This p tag is simply this. So now that you have access to these p tags, you can manipulate it. However, I want to manipulate these p tags at this top level here, at this function here. So I want another argument, the third argument, that will be the quantity. So we can say quantity element. This is the third argument. That means it has to be passed when the function is invoked. Okay, so here I can comment this out. So now there is a third argument, we need to pass it here. So we need to pass this here. So each time we click on this button, at the position where we click the button, it will get the position, the current iteration of this item, and pass into this function, and it will have access to it on this function. Remember, this is the third argument. So I need to also pass it on the subtraction. So when I click this button, every item I push to it at the time the array, at the portion of the array, when the button is clicked, is what it will pass to this function here. If you do console.log, let's look at quantity elements. What is quantity elements? When we do this, this is it. We have access to this quantity called 5. Right? Let's click on this one. What is this quantity called? Look at this quantity 3. This is quantity 3. If we come here and click on this quantity 5, exactly. So now we have this access to these items. We have access to these items. So how do we work on it? It has text, it has semicolon, then this is the number we're looking for. This number is what we're looking for. Now, to be able to do that, we should be able to use a JavaScript method that split a text into array. Let's look at how that works. So we can say get quantity value is going to be quantity element dot split. Split is a method in JavaScript that split a text into array. Then you can tell it what you want it to split the items into. I want it to split items using this semicolon. So when I use, if I put, it accept an array, a string, if I put semicolon, so it's going to split these items, removing this array, this semicolon. So we'll have this content. So let's exactly see how this works. Call the text element dot split method, invoke the split method, pass the argument that is needed. The argument that is needed that we want to split this text from the semicolon, split from the semicolon. All right. If you console.log get quantity value, so you're going to get an array. Okay, since split is not a function. Okay, yeah, it's actually having this error because that's not how it's supposed to be. I'm supposed to call the text value. Yes, so get element quantity dot text content. So having access to the text content, so I'm having access to quantity. If you look at it, if we console log this, when you do, remember that text content gives you the value of the elements. So if I click here, you can see quantity 5. However, what I want to work with is this number 5 because I cannot add string with number. Okay, we need to find a way to have access to this number 5. All right, so that's actually what it does. So if you look at it here, it gives you quantity 3, this quantity 3. All right, so what we can do is add a split method. Split method, split this item from the semicolon. Splitting the item from semicolon will give me this. Can you see? It's now giving me quantity and 5. It has removed the semicolon. So I'm splitting this item from the semicolon. That's how split works. You can read more about split to see how the method works. It's very, very useful and a vital method you use to manipulate array. All right, so having this now, I can now access this number 5. This is index 0, this is index 1. So to access index 5, that's the number, I can say index 1. So when I check quantity value, when I console quantity value, should give me the exact quantity number here. You can see, and I have access to 5. If I click on this one, I have access to 3. Click on this one, I have access to 3. Perfect. So now that I have this quantity, what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to decrease the quantity value when I add item and increase the quantity value when I reduce item. So I can say, so here, this is the node element here. So I can say quantity element dot text content, exactly this. So I want to update this value back. It's now equals to when it's being decreased, it should increase. So I can increase it and say, I want to increase it here. So I can say increase and say number, using number method. number method. So I can actually access this value here since I have this value here. So I can always say this value plus number one. All right. So that means it increases. So when I add item here, so it's going to what decrease. So when you're adding item, the quantity should decrease, and when you're subtracting item, the quantity should increase. So if you come back here and say, you can see it has reduced to 4. Okay, so we've not gotten it well. Let's look at it well. So the best thing you can do is to use this. You can get this on the button close to escape key on your keypad. You What's what they call in JavaScript, but you can see this string. It's not like this one we use. So you use this string. So now you can write quantity, then you can put a column, then to call a variable inside it. Instead of using the plus sign, you use string plus the number. You can call a variable inside this type of string quotation or whatever it's called. So to do that, you call the dollar sign, call the dollar sign, call the bracket. This way now you can pass a value into this. So you can pass a value here. So I can say number, and I can say get quantity value. Then I'm saying plus number one. Right? So we can do the same thing here. Repeat this one. So here it should be reducing. Yeah, here it should increase. All right. So let's see that in action. So you can see. So as I'm adding the item here is subtracted here. You see? So when it increases. So when it's not there, you don't item added here, it remains the 5 quantity that we're talking about. All right, so this is the best way you can do it and you achieve what you're looking for. Okay, so we are done with this. Now, what do we need to do when we are on zero quantity and we click the subtraction button? You can see we have -1, which is not professional number. You can't say this in programming. So you have to prevent your code from running when the item is equals to 0. So what do you do when when the quantity is equals to 0? Don't run this. If you click on this button, it should not do anything. So you have to write a conditional statement for that. If you look at the subtraction, this is the condition that handles the subtraction. So you can add another condition saying and you'll be targeting this quantity. So where is this quantity? This quantity is this item does, yes, exactly. So you can say number, you can say if this content is not equals to number 0. So only run this. So all of these conditions, when you're using AND, the AND operandi, if you use the AND operandi, you're saying that if this item, so event type must be subtract event type, and this has to be true. This must be true. When you have this double AND here, it means AND in JavaScript. So this also has to be true, and this condition has to be true. All right. Now this is comparison operator. You can read more about comparison operator and you can read more about conditional statements. All right. Comparison operator, we are saying that if it's not strictly equals to 0, this exclamation mark simply means not equals to. This means strictly equals to, and we have this means not equals to. So I'm saying let this code here run as long as event type is subtract and item.name.node name is equals to p, which is page, that is p tag, and that the item.content, the item.context content, the item here is simply this p tag, that if it's not equals to 0 on this tag. So with this now, you can see that this button doesn't run anymore. It doesn't run anymore because I have added this condition. It's no longer true because at this point, text content is 0. So if I increase it by 1, and I come here to decrease it, it surely will work, because at this point test content is 0 is 1. So this condition will be true, because here this is now true, because this item of test content, remember test content is what we use to get the value of ATM elements. All right, so it is picking the value of this. Here it is 1. So if you subtract it, it surely work. Now that it's on 0, this condition is now 40. It's not 4C, it's not true T. So if you click on minus, it will not run. So we also have to do the same thing for addition. It does not make sense, because here you have the quantity 5 products, and if you keep adding, and when you get to 5, the quantity is now 0. You're not supposed to keep adding. Now you keep adding, quantity keeps subtracting, because it's now more than the quantity of product you have. So you have to add the condition that will prevent this. All right, to do that, it becomes even more code. You have to write more code. Okay, so how do we resolve this problem? So this is a problem, and you have to solve it with code. When you're trying to solve problem with code, you have to think logically. You have to be smart to know how to run and how to execute and solve your problem using code. We have a problem here. If you keep increasing this, quantity will keep having negative value, which is not proper. You can't do this in proper application. So you have to do it in a way that is done in real life. So when the quantity has finished, you cannot increase this particular product anymore. You can decrease it, but you cannot increase it. Okay, we can as well check out this value here. Now we can as well target this and say if quantity is not equals to 0. So instead of storing the value up here, let's try this. Initially I stored the value, but let's see if this is going to work. So let's look at this. If this is not equals to 0, then we don't need all of this. If this can work, then we don't need all of this. So we can always check the value of quantity here and say, okay, let's check if this quantity here, remember, is actually this product quantity. So if it is not equals to 0, then you can keep adding this. You can keep adding this product. So let's see if that works. If we keep adding, you can see we can add more, because now quantity product is now 0. So what we simply said is, if the event that we are the event when we click the button, if we pass add to it, add, and if the item dot node name is equals to a p tag, and we are saying that get quantity value if is equals to 0, is not equals to 0, then we can go on and add and update all of these values. Update the quantity here, update the cards, and so update all of these values here. So after these values here, if these conditions are true. So the condition here, if it is subtract, if the node name is a p tag, and the item content is actually referring to this, that the item content is not, that's this quantity selection here, which is also item content, which is also this one. Why this deals with the quantity, this product quantity. So when you're adding, the addition is actually looking at this quantity to ensure that it is no longer 0. If it's now 0, it cannot add any item again. When you're subtracting, it's actually looking at this, that is not 0. If it's now 0, it cannot subtract anymore. So that's the logic behind that. Very simple, as you can see. So we add one, we'll load this page, we had 5 products here. So we added all the 5 here, so it's now 0. So you can't add more, because the product has finished. We added all the products. Now you have 5 here. So if you subtract now, you now have one quantity, because you subtracted 1 from here. You now have 4 left. Have 4 left here. You have 1 here. You can still add it again back to 0. So you can add more than, you can subtract. When it is 0, you can't subtract anymore. Quantity back to 5. Item here equals to 0. All right, same thing happens here. When you keep adding here, if it becomes 0, you can add more. When you keep subtracting, if it becomes 0, you can subtract more. So that's the logic behind it. So you have to think of logic when you're dealing with programming. Think of logic, the systematic way you solve your programming problem. Okay, so what else do we want to do? We're almost done with this. The next thing we need to do is, when the quantity is now 0, so it's actually applicable to all. So what is actually going on here? If we look at this, let's take a look at console.log here to see we have this item. So I have actually removed the button count. I don't need to count the button anymore, since we can actually check out all of this. So I've removed the button count I had here before. I've removed the button count, and the initial value that I wanted to be storing here. So I remove all of them since there is no need for it, because we can easily look at these values here. The addition button can easily look at the quantity product number here. If it's equals to 0, it will not allow you to add anymore. The subtraction button can actually look at the items here. If it is equals to 0, it will not allow you to add anymore. So since we have access to each of these items here, there's no need to store any variable at the top here. If you look at item here, this is the first argument, item element, which is actually passing this event type and the quantity element. So what are these values? I've actually explained this before. If you look at this, when this function was invoked, we pass the first argument, which happens to be the get nodes here. Before we do the array for each method here, we just pass the entire nodes that we have here, which is the div that contains the button, the subtraction button, the p tag, and the addition button. Then we pass the event type. The event type has to be the same. The event type you're passing here has to be the same. So what is event? Event is what you can create by yourself and say if the condition is equal to that event, check up, let this happen. Okay, this find quantity is simply referring to the item quantity here, which we are very sure about. All right, so what is going on here? So when let's check what happens with this console.log here. So we have all of these arguments, first one, second one, third one. Now if you check this out, if we add now, can you see we have all of this. This is the first argument here, which is this array that starts from here to this place. This is the div that contains the subtraction button, the speed tag, and the button addition button. That is it. It's a div. Get it? Can you see it's highlighting it here? It's highlighting it. This is the p tag and this is subtraction button. So because this is an array, we now have access to it here. We will have access to it. This item element is the first argument that we pass. So we have access to it here. We can now do for each using array method for it to map into it and have access to individual element to manipulate in each of these items here. Okay. Now the second argument is this add. This is the add, because we click on this add button. Remember when we invoke this button here, we pass add to it. So that's why you can have access to add here. So I'm not saying the event type. If the event type is equals to add, then I know the user actually click the add button. Then do this action, do this. That's event. Then the last argument is the quantity element, which is dealing with this. This is the quantity element passing you the value of this. That's why you can see 4 here, you can see 4 here. All right. So you click 3 here. You click 3 here. You can see it's giving you 2 because you've subtracted the 1 to it. Two. So that is how beautiful event is. You can create your arguments, and when you invoke the function, you pass the arguments. You can also create event by yourself and say when the condition equals to that event, do this. This is a little bit advanced, but it is quite straightforward and simple. If you have any question, you can always ask me. Okay, and what we also want to do, final thing we want to do here is when the quantity is now 0, we want to make this product unavailable anymore. How do we do that? It's quite straightforward. We need to add a div to this. We need to add a div here, and this div should cover the entirety of this image and make it blurry, something like that, or gray out. You get when the product finishes, it grays out, right? So that's what we want to do here. To do that, we need to come back to the first function we wrote, this function here. We need to create another div. So let's call this one, let's gray out elements div. We're saying that is equals to document dot create element. When you have a problem to solve in programming, you have to think of way to solve it. So we need to create a div. So you can see how this will work. So we now have a div element now that we've created. We want to assign that div. We want the div to cover the entirety of this place, all of this place. So to do that, we want the div to be second to the last element to be added. If that is the case, that means we'll be restructuring the entirety of this array. So if we add the div here, before we do that, we need to add a class name to it. So this is the div. So we'll do dot class list, or let's use set attributes. We're adding the type of class, and let's pass a class name. Let's call it gray out class. Gray out class is a class name. So we also need to add this second to the last. Now, if this second to the last is going to restructure, then
other things will work, especially the quantity selection. So this minus 2 becomes this one, or we can actually just add it around here. Let's see. So we won't, oh, let's add it here so we can actually know how this works. So I can show you how this works. So now that we've added this new element here, most of our code won't work again, especially the quantity, this one. This may not work because it's no longer the index position. Before, the product quantity element, this one, was second to the last. Now it's now third to the last. So minus 2 will no longer see this. Minus 2 will be seeing this. So we have to change this to minus 3 to be able to see this element. So to demonstrate what I'm saying, now that I've actually added this, let's go and style this gray out class. We have this class now. So go to CSS here. So let's add this. We want to ensure that the overall div has a position of relative so that we can, let's be sure that I've added relative to it. Yes, the main container, sub-main container. Let's check out this custom product div, custom product div. Okay, let's find the name. Custom product div, this one. It's okay. Now this is it. This is a class name, custom product div. We want to ensure this custom product div is the mother div of all the elements inside each of these items here. So if we go here and search for this, we need to be sure that it has a position of relative. Okay, so it should have a position of relative, position relative. Because if you check, if you add this background color to red, you see that it's actually all of this. Yes, these items here, each of this is the product div. So make it relative so that the new div we added, this new div we added here, we can make it absolute, position absolute. All right, so this is a new class here. So come down here and find the new class you just created. So here we can say width 100%, height. We want it to be 50%, we want it to be half. Okay, then cursor pointer not allowed, not allowed. Okay, background color, let's say red. So you see it, position absolute, top 0, bottom 0. So let's see. Good. So you can see. So we want to turn this on exactly when the product quantity is now 0. Okay. So background color should be something like gray. So let's have something like this. All right. So let's add opacity to it. Opacity 0.5. So good. So let's make it darker a little. Okay. So let's increase this to like 70%. Perfect. So it's giving this gray effect now, and you can click on it. Okay, good. So now that you have that, we want to dynamically add it. We don't want to add it all of these times. We don't want to add it all of these times. So the first thing we want to do is add a separate class. Let's see if I have a class. Okay, I already have this displays here. So let me just bring them down here. So we just have to have two other classes that deal with display none and display flex. So we already have this class. So We can add this class here. Let's see if this will work. So add this class no display, so it takes this away completely. Definitely, that's taking the class, that's taking this away because we have this class here no display. So we want to systematically turn it on only when product becomes zero. When product becomes zero. So if we go here, maybe somewhere around here, right? Okay, somewhere around here. So one of the things we have to do now is we can say if get quantity value, let me use number. Remember that get quantity value is actually these items here, the quantity, the product quantity. So we say get if this item is equals to 0, if it is equals to number 0, that means the product has finished. Then we want to remove a class. We want to remove a class first, and before we do that, we need to pass this div as an argument. So you have to create a fourth argument saying gray out div. Gray out div has to be passed as a fourth argument. So gray out div is now added as a fourth argument. So we can come here to where we invoke the function and pass gray out div. So where is gray out div? How do we access gray out div? If we go to console.log find quantity, remember this is find quantity where we are saying -2 before, right? Which gives us access to this value, right? Now because we've added gray out div, gray out div has been added to our function here. Gray out div was added here. Gray out div is now second to the last. If you go here, you find out that it's now gray out div that is being found here. Look at it this way. The gray out div is now being found here because gray out div is now second to the last. Remember, we placed gray out div on the array here as second to the last. So gray out div is now second to the last. That's why you'll find this is gray out div. All right. So the best way to do this now is if you come here and change this to 3, it's not going to work because if you click here, see this is not working because we're not getting the actual quantity products here. We are passing gray out the div here. That's why. So to get this to work, we have to change this to -3. This will give us exactly what we're looking for. See, they're giving us the p tag exactly, so it's work now. Exactly, beautiful. So to get the gray out div, which is now the, so we can say cons gray out div equals to this same item, but we are looking for index one for index position 2. That's what we're looking for, index position 2. So this becomes the gray out div. If you console log this now, if you check it out, you see it is the gray out div. Look at it, gray out div and the custom no display. Good. So we can now pass this as an argument. Remember the fourth argument is gray out div. Fourth argument is gray out div. So when we invoked our function, we can now pass this. We can now pass this. Invoke our function. Good. So when we go back here, if we console log gray out div, if we console log that, and if we click, and then you can see we have this first argument starting from here to here is the first argument, which is this one. Item element. Second argument is add because you click the add button, which is event type. Third argument is the p tag. That is the p tag, this one. And now we have a fourth argument, which is this div. So push this div to me here. Now that I have access to this div, I can now come here and I'll say if real div, okay, yeah, I'm just gonna say if get quantity value. I'm going to use the number method. Now if this is equals to 0, is equals to 0, that means gray out quantity. Remember the gray out quantity value is referring to this quantity value here. So I'm saying if it's equals to 0, that means the quantity has actually finished. So if it's equals to 0, first I need to remove this class. This is the class that is making this not to show. If we remove this class, this site, you can see this gray stuff will show. So we need to remove it. There's a way to remove it with JavaScript. So you will say gray out div dot class list dot remove. So you pass in the exact name of the class that you want to remove. I want to remove this class when this becomes 0. Else, if it's equals to 0, remove it, then add this gray out div dot class list dot add. Then I want to add this one. It has to be a string. So custom display custom. So this is how you remove this, how you add the class. So first of all, remove this class as is responsible for not displaying it, and secondly, they add this class to display it. So if you see, we need to try it. So okay, so let me try if it's equals to 1. Okay, so you can see it's showing. Now the reason is, this reason is actually working when I said equals to 1 is because at this state, get quantity is being there's a delay in the updates. Look at it here. If you check the value, let's look at, this is the value get quantity. You can see that the value here is not the same with this. Look at it here. Why this is 5, this is already 4. That's because at the time you clicked on this button, this was 5. However, this was where the subtraction took place. So when it is now 3, it's going to be 4, because as at this level, it was 4 when they picked the value here, but the subtraction happened here. That's how code works. So if you want to get this working, so I could just take this up. So let's see if that will work. If it's going to blow it out when it is greater, when it is actually 0, when the product quantity is 0. So let's see. It's still not going to work because the why it is 1 here is already 0 here. So what we are going to do is that we are going to perform the subtraction at this top level. So we are going to perform all of this calculation here. So we know that if it is add, it's going to add. If it is subtract, it's going to subtract. We know that if it is add, it's going to subtract from the product. If it is subtract, it's going to add to the product quantity. Okay, so instead of using a get let value, we could just, all right, we could just get this value here. And what we can do is, at this point, we say get quantity value. We could just use a different way of comparison conditional statement in JavaScript. We could say this is, instead of writing the if statement, we can just say if event type is equals to add, then we know that as a question we're asking if it's equals to add. If it's equals to add, then we are simply going to subtract from this number. So we're just going to wrap this in a bracket. So we are going to say minus number 1, then else. You put this else, then you would say if it's not add, then it's going to be subtract. So when we are subtracting, so then we can always get the current value of get quantity from here, since we are doing this subtraction addition at the top level here. So what we can now do is that instead of, we are not going to be subtracting anymore from here, so we can say equals to 0, then so instead of adding value here, we can just pass the exact value that we have here. Just pass the exact value. Then same thing here. We don't no longer do the subtraction addition from here. So just pass it here. So let's see this work. Perfect. So now me be sure. Quantity is actually is equals to 0. I need to be sure. Else if get quantity value number, get quantity value if it is greater than number 0, then if it's greater than number 0, then we want to remove this class. This is the class we will remove here. We'll remove the class that is displaying it and add class that will not display it. This class that will not display it, so we'll add it here. So okay, let me sort out this bug. There's a bug here. Let me sort it out. Okay, so this is what was causing the issue. So this was causing the bug. So the bug here, quite logical. So if you look at this is get quantity value. I'm saying that if get quantity value is not equals to 0, that's only when you can run this code, this line of code. However, when you look at it very well, if you look at it very well, you can see this is get value, get quantity value as a console.log. Now, closely watch it here. You will see it being listed here. Then watch this quantity here. Remember, the calculation now took place at this point. We have done the calculation here. We've done the subtraction and addition of the product quantity at this top level. But this is where we assign the value. We assign the value at this point. We assign the value here. This is where we assign the value. This is where we assign the value, right? So it means by this time here, at this point, before we assign the value, this has already gotten to 0. So it will not allow this code to run. Now look at it this way. At the point here, it is 4, it is 4, right? It is 3, it is 3. It is 2, it is 2, right? It is 1, it is 1. However, it will not run because when I click this button, it became 0 here because all of this subtraction has happened here, right? But we did update in here. So this code refused to run because I'm checking this, that this is not equals to 0, it will not run. That is the condition. So this was true, but this became false. So this code did not run. That is why I can't click further. All right, this is exactly what's happening. So instead of checking this value, since I'm checking it, since I'm now doing the calculation at the top level here, I could actually check this item value itself. So I could actually check it here and say quantity element dot text content. All right, so now if we check, it should work. Beautiful. So that's it. It's not having the proper states. It should work. Same thing with this. So all of these products are grayed out because I can't add them. So this is another bug. I need to check what's going on here and fix it. The code keeps running. So let's check it out and fix it. I'm going to pause the video. I'll resume when I fix it. All right, so I've seen the value. Remember that quantity of text content is always going to produce quantity and all of this number, remember. So I needed to use a split method here. So I'm supposed to do split. Then I'm going to say split this item on the column, then targeting index 1. Exactly what I did here, just the same thing I did here. That's what I'm going to do here. That's what I'm supposed to do here. So now I now have this number. So this is always, it was always returning true because it's actually not performing. It's not a number. It's actually mixed up of string and number, semicolon and number. So it wasn't actually doing anything. That's why it kept going. So now it should be able to go. Then it can't go anymore. Yes, yes, because now I have access to this number value. That is actually what I'm now using to check because string and number is always going to return truthy. That's actually what happens. All right, so same thing with this. You can add more. You can add more. You can see. You can add more. But however, you can actually decrease it. Similarly, you decrease, the gray removes. Beautiful. So that's it. This is all we wanted to do. So we have 5 here plus 3 here, coming 8 plus 3 here, 11, 8, 9, 10, 11. That's why we have 11 item on the cards. Okay, so if we come here and add these more three items, so all of these items are out of stock, out of stock, right? So you could actually write content here. So I'm giving an assignment, you try and do it. So immediately this gray array or div comes up. I want you to have a text here writing out of stock. So that is one practice you can do, and let me know if you get it. All right. So once this comes up, I want you to have this text here out of stock. So give it a try and let me know if you get that working.